Welcome to Blackwater Media's Juneteenth Anthology celebration. You may ask yourself, what is this all about? Juneteenth is the celebration that commemorates the liberation from bondage those sons and daughters of Africa held as slaves in the United States and had existed as such in the Americas since the year 1619. And although President Abraham Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, the matter had not fully concluded until June 19, 1865, with the announcement of General Order 3, proclaiming freedom for enslaved people in Texas, which was the last state of the Confederacy with institutional slavery. And so therefore join me now in an exploration of the supernatural and paranormal experiences of an enslaved people who dreamed and struggled for an existence beyond the shackles of animal servitude and to breathe in the still rarefied air of freedom. Back in 1880, a former slave from a Georgia plantation called Old Sam, his name's been lost to history. It was said that he was starting to do okay for himself. He'd been working about 30 acres of his own for a few years and was looking to buy 10 more. But this was post-Reconstruction era Georgia, and Jim Crow was the social and political reality. Old Sam was falsely accused of stealing chickens and tobacco seed, and worst of all, of talking to a white woman while looking her in the eye. A few nights later, 5 men in robes and burlap hoods kicked in his door and pulled him from his bed at gunpoint. He was whipped on a post, beaten, and kicked to near unconsciousness. It took 5 men to do this. They bound his hands and feet, doused him with lamp oil, and then burned him alive in a hayloft. That was more than 100 years ago. But the ground could not hold his despair and anguish. It could not contain his stolen humanity. And so Old Sam returned just a few weeks later to pay a call to 5 men. Not in vengeance, but to collect a debt and in exacting justice. His ancestors and their gods have very, very long memories. Hundreds of cultures worldwide have legends of dangerous mythical demons or beings that locals swear exist, but which science has yet to conclusively document. The chupacabra in Puerto Rico and Latin America, the Yeti of the Himalayas, and the Jersey Devil, well, of course, New Jersey. All of these fall into this category of creatures. Locals blame them for everything from livestock slaughter to human abductions, and despite the lack of proof of their existence, whispers and rumors of their evil deeds keep them alive in the darkest corners of the imagination. In the African country of Tanzania, specifically on the islands of Zanzibar, the demon that haunts the locals' dreams is the Popabawa, the Swahili word for bat-wing. The earliest recorded sightings of the Popabawa occurred in 1965 on the island of Pemba, though accounts of the creature popped up more frequently by the early 70s. While this may seem shockingly recent, many mythical creatures have relatively recent origins. The first chupacabra sighting only occurred in 1995. A shapeshifter, the Popabawa is said to take on both human and animal forms at will. It gets its evocative name, however, from the distinctive shadow cast by its outspread wings when it attacks. Many who have had encounters with this creature claim that it is a jinn released by a sheikh seeking vengeance. Unfortunately for those in Zanzibar, the sheikh quickly lost control of his spirit helper, who then turned to evil ways. According to more reports, the Popobawa will creep into your room in the dark of night and attack you in your own bed. Sometimes a sulfurous smell accompanies the creature, and occasionally it is heard on the roof, claws scraping before it enters. But a single Popobawa attack isn't the end of the horror. Tradition has it that if you don't tell others of the attack, the Popobawa will visit you again, staying longer and attacking more violently on each subsequent visit. The creature is said to also be particularly fond of attacking people who don't think that it exists. Since the earliest sightings, several Popobawa panics have broken out, most recently in 2007 in Dar es Salaam, though the panic of 1995 was by far the most widespread. Strangely, the sightings seem to happen in waves. Dozens or hundreds of individuals will report being attacked in a given year. Then the creature flies under the radar, so to speak, essentially unheard of for several years before appearing again. Perhaps the creature is the product of an evil sorcerer, conjured into our reality from some other realm through the process of dark magic. So understand that to many in Tanzania and surrounding environs, the Popobawa is very real. So should you by chance happen to see the outline of dark wings against the night sky, make sure to keep the lights on.
Introducing the newest member of our proud Afro Sheen family. With cocoa butter from the motherland, it's new Afro Sheen hand and body lotion. For hands and bodies. For your fingers, wrists, elbows, knees and ankles too. For all of you, wherever you want softer, smoother, younger looking skin. Afro Sheen hand and body lotion contains Mother Africa's prize skin softener, cocoa butter. Cocoa butter combines with other oils and moisturizers in a special skin softening formula with just the right amount of lemon fragrance for a fresh, clean smell. So cream on softness and smooth away ash and dryness. Like all the beautiful Afro Sheen products, it's for both of you, naturally.
In 1987, Minnie and William Winston had been married for 44 years. For the previous 22 years, they'd rented a 6-room red brick home at the corner of Fountain Drive and Morris Street in southwest Atlanta. It was just before midnight on September 8th when Minnie, 77, stepped out of the shower and found the bathroom floor covered with splotches of blood. Mrs. Winston immediately woke her 79-year-old husband saying, "Come look at all this red stuff coming out of the floor." Spots of blood ranging in size from a dime to a silver dollar were found on the floor and lower walls in the bathroom, bedroom, kitchen, basement, and every hall. The substance was also located under a television and in narrow, nearly inaccessible crawl spaces in the basement. Homicide Detective Steve Cartwright agreed, saying that in his 10 years of service, that he'd never seen anything like this. He called it an extremely strange situation. "I'm guessing it was an animal," stated Homicide Detective Richard Price, "and I hope that's all it was." But it wasn't. You see, the couple had no pets, and there were no rodents in the house. Police were not terribly concerned because William, retired from the National Screen Service Company, was often in bed attached to a dialysis machine, which cleanses the blood of people suffering from kidney failure. However, Mrs. Winston seemed to reject his blood as the solution to the mystery, saying, "I don't know what the stuff is." The bleeding house immediately captured the fancy of Atlanta, drawing crowds from across the metro area. Prying visitors became such a problem that police declared the house a crime scene to prohibit inquiring minds from trespassing. By September 11th, it was known that the blood type in the house was O, and William and Minnie's was A. No match. Atlanta homicide detectives grew frustrated as their work progressed. "We will continue a routine investigation," stated Homicide Commander Lieutenant Horace Walker, "and if we find that no crime was committed, then we're through with it." Detective Price stated, "We're still trying to figure out where the blood came from. We plan to check with the state crime lab today about other possibilities." Police handling of the bloody evidence had come under criticism from the lab. Believing an animal might have deposited the splotches, police had sent fresh samples to Grady Memorial Hospital to determine if it was human or animal blood. Only then, 13 hours after Mrs. Winston called the police, was the state crime lab notified. Crime lab director Larry Howard stated that they could have learned much more, including the gender, ethnicity, traces of drugs or alcohol more easily had the blood been fresh. The only semi-relevant fact discovered by the crime lab was that it looked like the blood was projected out of something or shaken off something. As the police investigation continued, public and media interest intensified. The offices of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, radio, television stations, and the Atlanta Police Department were flooded with inquiries from across the Atlanta area and as far away as California and New York. "Are the walls of that house really bleeding?" people generally asked. "We were swamped with calls," admitted police spokesman Charles Cook. "The place was a madhouse. Some people wanted to know if the radio stations were just joking. We're getting lots and lots of calls," an employee of radio station WVEE said. Several were from psychics saying that they could get the blood out of the house. The Winstons found themselves besieged in their home by throngs of curious spectators. "The phone rang all night," Mrs. Winston stated on September 10th, "and I'm fed up with it." Further, she said, "I'm tired of all these people asking me these questions." Mrs. Winston declared that she did not want to have anything to do with the controversy. "People are coming out here to see it and troubling us." She was getting very little sleep. The passage of another day left the Winstons even testier than before. From inside the house, Winnie was heard to shout, "What they've said about this is all lies, and just leave us alone." From the bedroom, William yelled, "There's no blood in this house. Now get the hell away from here." One intrepid reporter who gained entrance found spots of blood on the floor and lower walls of the living room, and a quarter-size splotch on the back door. These paranormal mysteries usually just slowly fade away, and such was the case with Atlanta's Bleeding House. The Homicide Bureau and the State Crime Lab never identified the source of the blood, nor did they detect any indication of a hoax or crime. "It troubles me that we don't have any answer," Crime Lab Director Howard summed up. Law enforcement personnel were understandably disappointed by their lack of results from the investigation. But the supernatural does not tend to stick around for scientific analysis. With the next bloody slaying in Atlanta, the Bleeding House was forgotten. Africa is a land rich in beauty and history. The continent contains breathtaking landscapes and a wondrous diversity of animal and plant life. And then, of course, there are the vampires. You see, in nearly every country, every culture, and on every point of the map, you will find stories of such creatures. Africa is no different. In fact, it is argued and believed by many that the vampire itself originates in Africa. Let us now take a look at the myriad forms that the vampire takes in that place where man first walked the earth. The Obi-Ifu is a living vampire, either male or female, and was found among the Ashanti people of West Africa. The Obi-Ifu would leave its body at night to cause all kinds of terror. Its food of choice was the blood of children, but when it wasn't eating the young, it was causing slow and painful deaths. It also destroys crops by sucking out the sap and vital juices. The word Obeifu comes from the Ashanti word bayi, which means sorcery. A kind of psychic vampire, the Tikoloshi or Tokoloshi, is a creature of the Xhosa people of Lesotho and the southernmost African plains. Like many supernatural beings in Africa, the Tikoloshi is a mixture of vampire and demon and has a strong association with witches and sorcerers. In many Xhosa legends, the Tikoloshi is a demon that looks like a baboon and has a connection to water. It's described as short, bulky, and has a high forehead and balding head, and it walks around during night or day swinging its long arms like a monkey. But it has many powers and can shapeshift if it chooses to. It can take human form, which would make it look almost normal or natural, since some of its monkey-like traits would show. It may also take the form of a big black bird-like creature with a skull head, so that it can fly over villages in search of its victims. The Tikoloshi is known for its ravenous sexual appetite, so most of its victims are women. This creature doesn't feed on blood, instead, the energy of a person, leaving them weak and sickly. If the Tikoloshi feeds too often on a single person, it can result in the victim's death. When it's feeding time, the Tikoloshi will approach a village woman at any time of the day in human form. It will greet her in a friendly, albeit sometimes overly friendly manner, maybe offering to help her carry something in return for sexual favors. If she were to say no, the beast would revert to its original horrific form and leap on her before she even had time to react. The Tikoloshi are very fast. Then it would proceed to rape her and feed on her life force. The Adze is a type of vampire creature who turns itself into a firefly or other insect to feed before returning to its human form. They can transform themselves into any number of common insects, which are seemingly harmless and very difficult to capture. The Adze have a taste only for the blood of the innocent. They are hunters of children and only children, and they especially like to feed on infants. They can also feed on palm oil and coconut water, and will often raid a village's entire supply of these, but they become dangerously weak if they do not feed on the blood of children. An Adze can sustain itself without needing to kill any child. It can take enough blood to survive. However, if the Adze is deterred or thwarted from feeding for a long enough period of time, it will go on a ravenous frenzy for blood. Often, when the vampire reaches this stage of hunger, even the victims who survive become infected with a deadly disease which eventually kills them. The Adze can also have the power to possess a human and become a living vampire. When the Adze is captured, it will revert to its human form. A human sorcerer can also willingly become possessed by an Adze spirit for the abilities and powers they will gain. As an Adze host, they're able to change their form like a shapeshifter from human to something else by magic. When they are captured, however, the magic will be lost and they will revert back to their human form. This is the only way to destroy the Adze, but catching them is the trick. Unfortunately, there is no known way to protect against an Adze. Nothing will keep them out or keep a child safe from its attacks. The only measure that can be taken against them is capturing them and destroying their human form. The safest thing to do is keep your supply of coconut water and palm oil up and set a trap. The Ashanti also have stories of vampire creatures of the forest who are not controlled by any witch, but are monsters in a class of their own. These creatures live in nature, in the wild, and feed on passers-by and hunters. Two such creatures are the Asenbosum and the Sasabonsum, very similar in their habitat and feeding practices, though the Sasenbosum have wings and are very similar to bats, while the Ansenbosum are more like humans, save for their hooked legs and iron teeth. The Asenbosum live in trees of the forests and feed mainly on those who dare to wander into their domain. They wait silently in their trees to pounce on unsuspecting prey, and rip out their throats with their teeth made of iron. This creature is a little unusual looking. Instead of feet, its legs are curved at the end like hooks, which they use to hang from the tree branches while they wait for prey to wander into the forests. The stories of the Sasabonsum are well known throughout Ghana and Togo. They also live in trees and will drain the blood of those who wander into their territory. These vampires, while humanoid, look very similar to bats. They are mostly human in appearance, with a human face and somewhat human body, save for their arms, which are short and stubby, and for the wings. Their wings are huge. Some legends claim the Sasabosum to have a wingspan of about 20 feet. The creatures are sometimes described as having emaciated bodies and twisted feet, and sometimes myths tell of these creatures having claws and horns as well, and some myths say that these also have iron teeth. Both of these vampires, though tree dwellers, are deadly and vicious. From the eastern Cape of Africa comes the Impundulu, a ravenous blood drinker. The creature is actually a witch's servant, or rather her familiar. It's usually owned by a female witch and is later passed on to the witch's daughter. For this reason, the female children of witches rarely marry. The Impundulu is a merciless killer. Entire families and herds of cattle were completely wiped out as the familiar sucked down the blood of each victim. But if the blood loss didn't kill them, it was the wasting disease caused by the Impundulu, or sometimes it left you with a horrible cough and the inability to have children, a condition known as ifika. But in rare cases, the victim got a quick death. This was called being slain by the bird of heaven, and it involved a sharp, unbearable pain in the chest or head. And there you have it. These are just a few examples of the vampiric horrors that exist on the continent of Africa. I could go on, I assure you, but the hour is late, and outside I can hear the sound of wind and rain, and perhaps the sound of something else lurking in the darkness. I'd like to offer my sincerest greetings to all who care to venture into this dwelling of darkness. We will journey to the sea islands of Georgia, where the ancient mystic customs of West Africa have evolved and transformed into a uniquely American practice. Frankly, this is a story of brutality, vengeance, and magic. Our tale is called The Gullah Witch, and there is no better place for it than the Nightfall Radio Show. They called her Mama Lucy, and she lived in an old cabin outside of town, down by Fox Creek. Nobody really knew how old she was, and certainly no one had the nerve to ask. She could be seen each morning and again in the evening just before dark in a rocking chair, and the occasional passerby would wave at her, at which she would respond with little more than a nod. Rumors about the old lady had circulated for as long as a lot of folks could remember. She'd been born into slavery on the old Silas plantation, that much was sure. Her father had been killed by his owner, Henry Silas, and his brother James, when it was learned that he planned for his family to escape to the north, where he would enlist in the Union Army. She never forgot the horror or the grief. In any event, over the years, she showed a knack for concocting all kinds of teas, potions, powders, and even little amulets that many folk believe could fix anything from a head cold to a run of bad luck. But other folks were afraid of Mama Lucy. Some said she was a root worker. Others straight out called her a witch. And there was hardly ever a time when smoke could not be seen billowing from her chimney. One night in the winter, the coldest night of that year, so they say, a terrible scream was heard in the woods. Not an animal, but something not quite human either. Of course, no one ventured out to see what it was. After all, what horror might be waiting beyond the warmth and safety of your door? What evil might be dwelling in those dark, icy woods? Next morning, a grisly scene was discovered in those woods. There were bodies, or rather, body parts strewn about, most stuck to the ground in frozen puddles of blood. They were ripped, torn, slashed, and even partially eaten. All around the area were strange tracks that no one could readily identify. They might have been coyote or even wolf tracks, except that they were much, much too large. The bodies were later identified as members of the Silas family, specifically 2 nephews and 3 grandsons of Henry and James Silas. That same morning, Mama Lucy sat out on her front porch, rocking slowly in the cold, late January air. She looked down at her left hand and saw the red, faded remnants of a pentagram. And for the first time in a long time, a smile of quiet satisfaction appeared on her face.
When do you say Budweiser?
After doing this about 3,000 times a day. After a hard tennis match with my friend Ron. As soon as I knock this ball out of the park.
When do you say Budweiser?
It's everywhere.
When my mother-in-law leaves town.
After a long night in here.
Or when you say Budweiser?
Let me hear you say it, people.
Budweiser! You have said it all.
You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. Africa, the birthplace of mankind and, of course, civilization itself. It is a continent steeped in history, tradition, remembered and forgotten knowledge, magic, and sometimes even monsters. First is the Groot slang, a name meaning big snake, and it refers to a cryptid which lives in a deep cave down in Richtersveld in South Africa, also known as the Great Snake of the Orange River. This creature can also be found in swamps and freshwater sources. According to the South African legend, this creature is as old as the world we live in, and its story starts at creation. It is said that as the gods created the world, they created this creature. However, they made a mistake in making the Groot slang, and they gave it way too much intellect and strength. Having realized their mistake, the gods began creating other creatures out of the Groot slang to minimize their strength. One of the Groot slangs escaped and gave rise to other animals of its kind. The Groot slang can lure elephants to its cave where it devours them. This cave is said to connect to the sea and is full of valuable gems. The Groot slang's love for treasure is so overwhelming that locals believe that victims can buy their way out of getting devoured by offering it diamonds. The Ajul, also known as the bush dog, is a cryptid canine believed to be a phantom with the ability to take the form of a dog or a wolf. It is said to stand at 2.5 feet, and its coat is crimson with a blue tint. Strangely, the creature also has webbed feet. Locals claim that the creature uses pheromones to cause discord among its prey to make hunting easier. These creatures are said to be found in arid regions, and they hunt in packs. The dingoneck is believed to live in the Congolese jungles and found in rivers and lakes. It measures 3 to 6 meters in length and has a square head. The tail of the dingoneck is said to contain poison which it secretes to weaken its prey. This scaly creature is very territorial, and it will kill anything that wanders into its habitat, including fishermen. Jaba fofi, also known as the giant spider, is believed to be a new kind of arachnid which inhabits the Congo forests. The Baka, who are indigenous to the Congo, say that the creature can spin a web between 2 trees which it uses to capture animals such as birds and small game. The creatures are said to be strong enough to overpower humans. Other areas where such a creature has been seen include Vietnam, Zimbabwe, and Uganda. The Agagwe, also known as the Kukundakari or Kalomba in Zimbabwe and the Congo, is a human-like creature spotted in the forests and jungles of East Africa. The first known sighting by a white man occurred in 1900 by a Captain William Hitchens, but was reported 37 years later in the December issue of the Discovery magazine. It usually stands from 2 to 5 feet tall with several human features. The creature is also said to have odd characteristics such as long arms and rusty-colored hair covering its body, with yellowish-red skin under its coat. Sometimes it's described as copper. Its feet are roughly 12 centimeters long. The differences between the Agagwe and a modern chimpanzee is that the Agagwe have a rounded forehead, smaller but sharper teeth, and different hair and skin color. The Nkinyamba is a legendary serpent that dwells at the base of the Howick Falls in South Africa and is believed to have the head of a horse. It's mainly active during the warm seasons, and locals claim that when angered, the creature can stir up a storm. The creature is said to be over 20 feet long. Mamlambo is a creature that appears in South African and Zulu folklore, known to the natives as the brain sucker. This quasi-reptilian monstrosity terrorized the villages around the Mtslava River in South Africa, and was notorious for dragging its victims into its murky depths, where it would devour their faces in order to consume their brains. These animals have been described by eyewitnesses as being an astounding 6 to 7 feet in length. Other descriptions include a long tail, 4 stubby legs, a crocodilian torso, a serpentine neck, and a horse-like head. It's even been suggested that this animal may be bioluminescent. These are just a few of the cryptids that have been reported in Africa down through the decades, and even centuries. But who knows what secrets await there? There are still places in Africa, including the Congo Basin, with 3.7 million acres that are largely unexplored. Knowing that, it is quite possible that the land once known as the Dark Continent holds more secrets that can ever be imagined.
May I help you, sir?
If I wanted a Whopper and I asked you to hold the pickles and hold the lettuce, I know I'd get that fast. But would I get to hear you sing?
No, sir.
No?
You'd get to hear us sing. Girls? Ooh, hold the pickle, hold the lettuce, special order, donuts, bread, and all we ask is that you let us serve it your way.
All right.
Yeah, we can fill your broad beef Whopper fresh with everything on top, or any way you think it's proper, have it your way.
Hey, you got one big hit on your hands.
Well, the Whopper's one big hamburger.
You know how they say some folks are lucky at cards and some are lucky at love? Well, that fit Bobby Hansen to a T. He was the best poker player in the county, but somehow he couldn't find himself a bride. Oh, he proposed to several girls, and even got accepted by a few, but they always got cold feet a day or two before the wedding, and it was bye-bye Bobby. After the third time, Bobby was mighty discouraged, and his pa felt real sorry for him. They were working together in the family grocery store, and Bobby would sometimes sit on top of the pickle barrel and tell his pa all his woes. And his pa told him to hang in there, because a nice lady was on her way. Neither of them believed it, but it made both of them feel better to hear it said. Well, the day after their latest talk, the old woman who poled her barge to the swamp to deliver milk and eggs to the grocery store had a long talk with Bobby's pa. It seemed she had this daughter who was hankering after a husband with a steady job, and the old man thought Bobby would do the job nicely. She suggested they introduce the pair at the next dance, and Bobby's pa agreed. The night of the dance, Bobby's pa insisted that his son dress in his best. Bobby was dragging his feet a little, remembering all those women who played him false and not wanting to go, but his pa dragged him out anyway. Well, the moment Bobby clapped his eyes on the dark-eyed girl from the swamp, he was head over heels in love. Her eyes sparkled like the sunlight on the bay. Her skin was as creamy as new milk. Her voice was low and sweet. The pair cuddled and cooed and waltzed the whole night long, and come sunrise, Bobby was all for bringing his new love before the visiting priest who delivered his sermons in the grocery store, since there was no church in that vicinity, and getting married right away. Well, the girl was willing to get married, but not by a priest. "Let's just go to the Beaumont and have the judge marry us," she said to Bobby, and he was so smitten he agreed, though it would have been quicker and easier to just walk a mile down the road to see the priest. By the next evening they were wed, and Bobby brought his pretty bride to the nice little cottage he rented just down the road from the family grocery. It had a nice front porch with a swing, a big bedroom on the second floor, and a big attic with a window that could be made up into a second guest room should his new mother-in-law care to visit from her home in the swamp. After fixing him a nice dinner, Bobby's new bride sat a while in the rocking chair near their bed while Bobby yawned and watched her fondly. She cuddled under the blanket and knitted and hummed, and Bobby's eyes grew heavy. He didn't wake up until early morning, when his new bride crept into bed all hot and sweaty and fell asleep at once. When he asked where she'd been, she wouldn't answer him. Bobby was mighty sure that his bride had snuck out on him on their first wedding night. But when she got snappish and her eyes blazed like they did when he questioned her, he grew frightened and backed down. Life took on an odd pattern for Bobby. During the day, everything was perfect. His wife was sweet and pretty and loving. She kept the house sparkling clean and cooked him wonderful meals. But each night she refused to come to bed after supper. Like their wedding night, she sat up singing and rocking and knitting until he was asleep, and did not come to bed till just before dawn. She was always sweaty and cranky when she came to bed, and went to sleep before Bobby could question her. Bobby was very confused and upset by this behavior, and finally confided in his pa one morning after opening up the grocery store. Bobby's pa was awfully worried. The visiting priest had gone on to his next parish, and there was no one they could consult but the local conjure woman. So he sent Bobby to her with a couple of chickens as a gift. The conjure woman knew all about the hoodoo magic and was an excellent herbalist. Local folks went to her when they were sick, on account of the doctor lived almost 20 miles away. When she heard Bobby's story, she told him to pretend to go to sleep that night and watch what his new bride did. Then he was to come back and tell her everything. Bobby agreed. The next evening, he pretended to fall asleep while his bride rocked and sang in her chair. Then he followed her up to the attic and watched through the crack in the open door as she sat down at the spinning wheel and spun off her skin, leaving only pulsing red muscles and blue veins. She was a terrifying sight, and she sprang through the window and flew away into the night. Bobby ran out to the privy and was sick after he saw her. Who was this monster that he was married to? He was still trembling and in shock when his bride, looking like a normal person again, crept into bed at dawn, and he had trouble behaving normally at breakfast. As soon as he could get away, Bobby ran to the home of the conjure woman and told her about the spinning wheel and the terrible skinless creature who flew away from his attic. "A boo hag," the conjure woman said at once. "You've married a boo hag." "What's a boo hag?" asked Bobby. "A boo hag is a witch and a shapeshifter," said the conjure woman. "She lures men into her trap and then delivers them to her boo daddy, who eats their flesh and gnaws their bones. And that's what she'll do to you if you don't get rid of her first." The conjure woman told Bobby to get himself some blue paint. As soon as the boo hag left the house that night, he was to spread the blue paint on every window frame and every door frame and make sure it was 2 coats thick. A boo hag couldn't fly through a window or door that was painted blue. And if she didn't get back into her skin before dawn, she would be trapped without it and be revealed for the monster she was. So he was to leave one tiny window unpainted and keep it open a sliver so the boo hag could squeeze through. Then he was to fill up her skin with salt and pepper, which would burn her up from the inside out. And Bobby promised to do exactly as the conjure woman said. That night Bobby lingered over his dinner, looking with sad eyes at the pretty woman sitting opposite him. He knew she was really a monster inside, but it was so nice to have a little wife in his home. He hated like anything to see her go, but he didn't want to get eaten by a boo daddy, and that was his fate if she stayed. So he went up to their bedroom and pretended to fall asleep while she rocked and sang and knitted. Then he followed her quietly upstairs and put salt and pepper into her skin after her ugly red-muscled blue-veined figure had flown out the window to her boo daddy. He spent the rest of the night painting over every door and window frame with blue paint, leaving only one small unpainted window open in the cellar. He nailed it up so that it would be open no further than a crack, just as the conjure woman had instructed him. Then he hid himself behind a large chest of drawers up in the attic to wait for the boo hag. Just before dawn, the boo hag came flying up to the attic window. As soon as she touched the blue frame, she gave a shriek of pain and rage. Bobby listened as she flew around the house, testing each window and door and howling like a banshee when it burned her skinless hands. Then she found the little window in the cellar, and he heard the thump as she landed beside it, followed by a painful whimpering sound as she squeezed and squeezed herself through the narrow opening, her skinless red muscles and blue veins tearing painfully against the rough wood. The boo hag ran up 3 flights of stairs into the attic and squeezed into her skin as fast as she could. She just barely got it on when the first light of dawn shone over the horizon. And that was when the salt and pepper did their work, burning the boo hag's body from the inside out. With a scream of agony, she flung herself out the attic window. The glass shattered everywhere as she tried to fly away, tearing at the skin to get it off. But it was too late. She exploded into tiny pieces right over the swamp, and the alligators had them a mighty feast of cooked boo hag for breakfast that morning. So Bobby was once again without a wife, but bachelorhood looked much better to him after that, and he never went looking for a wife again. Of course, after he made a pile of money and oil, the girl started chasing him. But that's another story. Aniloko, or in the plural, Biloko, are creatures from the folklore of the Nkundu people of Zaire, now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it's described as being the returned spirit of an ancestor belonging to those that still live there. Another interesting explanation is that it was once somebody that died an unfortunate death who was unable to move on to the afterlife. It is said to rise from its grave, hideously transformed, appearing as an ugly, diminutive creature that has characteristics of both animal and plant in the form of sharp teeth, snout, long claws, and grass covering its otherwise bald body with a grudge against the living. It dwells in the darkest, densest regions of the rainforest, within the hollows of trees, ferociously and jealously guarding its treasures. Although there are game and rare fruits in the rainforest, an Iloko will prey on unwary travelers, or those foolhardy enough to try and enter its territory. They will hunt using their perfect camouflage and a magical bell which is said to be able to enchant or paralyze a man. To survive, you will need to be an intrepid hunter, because successful hunters need to possess strong magic, without which they would never see game at all. If you are unfortunate enough to succumb to an Iloko's magic, it will devour you whole by dislocating and stretching its jaws wide open to accommodate your entire body. These elusive creatures are dwarf-like in stature, with pot bellies and a snout like that of an animal. Though completely hairless, they grow moss and grass over their short bodies and wear clothing fashioned from leaves and other foliage. They are said to have piercing eyes that glow like fire, viciously sharp claws and jaws that are able to dislocate, similar to a snake, which can stretch wide enough to swallow a human whole, whether dead or alive. In contrast to their grotesque visage, they are said to have gentle voices like that of a child. Unfortunately, the origins of this creature are hard to pinpoint due to a lack of written records. Tribes located in remote regions will often rely on history and superstitions to be passed on via word of mouth. It is clear, however, that the Iloko is deep-rooted in the region's folklore and has existed for generations, if not hundreds of years. However, it is told that the Iloko are the returned and restless spirits of those who once dwelt in the region of the forest, which they now hunt and protect. As they died an unfortunate death, they are unable to move on and instead rise as hideous monsters, moving into the secluded parts of the forest within the hollows of trees and preying on unwary travelers. Hostile and predatory, the Iloko are said to despise the living. They are expert hunters with a natural camouflage and a taste for human flesh, and will use magic to their advantage, making them a formidable force to reckon with without the right skill set and counter magic. As previously stated, while hunting, the Iloko will carry small bells, which they will ring to attract or paralyze their intended prey. These contain a powerful magic that only the most skilled of hunters with mystical protection can escape from when heard. Once their victim has been lured in, they will strike, swallowing them whole, then regurgitating their bones afterwards. The bells of the Iloko are said to be impossible to resist, and although there are certain amulets and fetishes which can be used to supposedly disarm or dispel the magic effect of them, it is still said that only professional hunters who possess these mystical powers can travel safely through the forest. That said, if you are lucky enough to avoid the Iloko's magic and confront the creature, it can be physically overpowered with raw strength and slain with ordinary weapons. Once dead, however, its corpse must be dismembered and each part of the body spread apart and buried in separate graves to prevent its resurrection. Cautionary tales warn men to never leave a wife alone in the forest, and for all ordinary people to remain in the village during the hours of darkness. For who knows when and where the Iloko will strike.
For the past 30 years, the United Negro College Fund has helped 500,000 black students change the course of their lives at UNCF colleges. Thousands have become doctors, engineers, and teachers, perhaps changing the course of your life. But today, there just isn't enough money. And tomorrow...
We're sorry, but this course has been canceled.
Please, don't let this happen. Support the United Negro College Fund. A mind is a terrible thing to waste.
The master of the plantation was a firm supporter of the Confederate president and had committed to send as much food as he could to the Southern Army. Things were going well at first until the Yankees began attacking the master's supply lines. The master suspected a traitor among his slaves and soon discovered that the Yankee spy was a slave woman named Big Liz. She was a behemoth of a girl who could pick up 2 full-grown pigs, one under each arm, and cart them over to the slaughterhouse without assistance. If he confronted her directly and she fought back, she would have taken him to pieces. So the master came up with a different plan to rid himself of the spy. He approached the giant girl and asked her to assist him with a special task. He told her that President Jefferson Davis had entrusted him with a large chest full of gold. To keep it out of Yankee hands, he wanted to bury the chest where it would never be found. The girl's eyes gleamed when she heard of this false report. The master knew she was already planning to betray the existence of the chest to the Yankees. The master made Big Liz carry the heavy trunk several miles out into the swampland and asked her to dig a deep hole for the trunk. He sat at his leisure while she worked and strained for hours against the muddy ground, which kept oozing back into the hole. When the slave girl was completely exhausted, the master decreed the hole to be large enough for his war chest. Wearily, Big Liz dropped the shovel and pulled the heavy chest down until it lay at her feet. Then she started to climb out of the deep hole. But the master barred her way, and Big Liz gazed up at him in sudden fear as he loomed over her. "Traitor! Yankee spy!" the master hissed. "There's only one path open to a traitor." The master swung his sword at her, and the sharp edge of the blade cut clean through the slave girl's neck. Her head went rolling away into the tall grass as her body toppled across the chest. The master heaped dirt over the chest and the body of the slave girl who had betrayed him. Briefly, he considered finding her head and burying it in the pit with her body, but it was too dark to go wandering in the dangerous marshland, and he knew that scavengers would make short work of the head when they found it. As the master walked toward home through the dark swamp, he became aware of a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, as if someone were watching him. The master walked faster as clouds obscured the light of the moon. The master's teeth chattered as a breeze cut through him like the sharpened blade of the sword at his side, and his straining ears picked up the sound of footsteps on the path behind him. The master was filled with a terrible superstitious dread of demons and witches and ghosts. He broke out in a panicked run, fleeing up the path as fast as his legs would carry him. To his relief, he saw the lights of his house rise before him and knew he was home. As he rounded the back corner of his house, he was confronted by a massive, dirt-encrusted figure that glowed with blue fire. The smell of rotting leaves and marsh grass filled his nostrils as his eyes raced up and up the tall creature until they rested on the stump of its neck, where a head had resided only an hour before. Then he heard a chuckle from the creature's side, and he saw the phantom's head tucked under her arm. The master stumbled backwards, gabbling desperately in fear as the ghost placed her head upon the ground with one hand and grabbed the collar of his shirt with the other. The murdered slave girl snapped the master's neck in two and dropped his dead body to the ground beneath his bedroom window. Then Big Liz gathered up her severed head and vanished into the darkness. They say that on the anniversary of her death, the ghost of Big Liz still may be seen roaming the swamplands near her old home. Anyone foolish enough to walk near her grave will be driven away by the phantom, which to this day still defends the place where the Confederate chest is buried.
men have it in whatever they do. Some men have it, they always come through. Some men always seem to get it together. Those are the men who wear English leather. Some men know how to treat me right when they come to call. My men wear English leather, or they wear nothing at all.
Have you ever heard of the Plaid Eye? Well, if not, I'll tell you. And afterwards, you'll probably wish you'd never heard a word about it. The Plaid Eye is a malicious, ghostly black dog from the folklore of the West Indies, South Carolina, and my own home state of Georgia. Plaid Eyes wander lonely roads, sometimes restricted to their own grave sites in the shape of an animal. Most often, this animal is a dog with blazing eyes. It could almost manifest as the ghost of the human it once was. A cat, a cow, or a person with no head. At other times, the spirit was invisible except for its fiery eyes, which were considered the best way to identify an animal as being a disguised Plaid Eye. Sometimes the spirit takes no shape at all, only a freezing, suffocating mist. Now, a Plaid Eye is created whenever a person dies without a proper burial or is buried carelessly, unsettling their spirit. The angry ghost of the person manifests as a malevolent, shape-shifting being that harasses the people who fail to bury it decently. At other times, it's the remnants of a person who has unfinished business on earth and wants to cause trouble, or died unjustly and wishes to avenge its own death. It wanders the place of its burial, unable to find rest, and terrorizing anyone who passes by. Unlike many black dog spirits, the Plaid Eye is purely malevolent, or at least vengeful. Sometimes it only seeks justice and the punishment of those who wronged it in life. But at other times, it's simply a killer. Its appearances are linked to the new moon. In some sources, only people born with a caul over their heads could see the Plaid Eye in its true form. Plaid Eyes bent on vengeance would exclusively hunt the people that they blamed for their deaths, but others were more indiscriminate in their choice of prey. If a person encountered a Plaid Eye, the spirit would begin to grow to an immense size, eventually enveloping and consuming the victim. At other times, the Plaid Eye follows the person without doing any harm. Sometimes it would harass and torment them, driving them insane. Especially powerful Plaid Eyes could suck out the human soul. The Plaid Eye could shapeshift and grow, like I said, to an impossible size, which is how it caught its victims. The only way to stop a Plaid Eye was to find the corpse of the person it once was and give it a proper burial. This would cause the spirit to end its quest for vengeance and move on. At other times, the punishment of the person who killed or otherwise offended the Plaid Eye's living form would calm the creature. If you ever want to encounter this evil specter, and I can assure you, you don't, remember this: avoid derelict graveyards, isolated back roads, and lonely, seldom used trails or paths, especially at night. Between 1911 and 1912, an estimated 20 women were abducted and brutally murdered in Atlanta. It was reported that all the serial killer's victims were attractive black or biracial women from impoverished communities. According to a Baltimore Sun article, the women were also, quote, neatly dressed. Most of the women were abducted at night while walking alone. A vast majority of the victims were approached from behind, struck in the head, and transported to a more secluded location where they were tortured, mutilated, and ultimately killed. It was reported that most of the women were killed on Saturday nights, and their bodies were discovered the following day. Most of the victims were part of Atlanta's tight-knit black community, which formed amid ongoing racial tensions in the region. Although the state was plagued with race-related violence and persistent segregation, the black community worked together to build strong connections within their neighborhoods. At the time, no suspects were identified, and the women appeared to be chosen at random. The community became understandably frustrated with the media's apparent lack of interest in the crimes and the authorities' failure to identify a viable suspect and make an arrest. Although the Atlanta Ripper seemingly vanished by 1912, and police eventually identified several suspects, the identity of the brutal killer was never conclusively proven, leaving the murders unsolved. The brutal nature of the murders led to a natural comparison between the Atlanta killer and London's Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper killed at least 5 women in 1888. Although he did not kill a large number of women, the sheer brutality of the murders gained worldwide attention. Jack the Ripper did not simply kill his victims. He tortured them and mutilated their bodies. Like Jack the Ripper, the Atlanta killer used a number of methods to torture, mutilate, and kill his victims. He was therefore dubbed the Atlanta Ripper. One of the victims, a girl named Lena Sharp's body was found near a set of railroad tracks. According to reports, her throat was slashed so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. Sadie Holly's throat was slashed as well. However, she also suffered multiple wounds to the head, which were inflicted with a large rock. Like the others, Addie Watt's throat was also cut, but she was also beaten about the head with a coupling pin, which fell off a train. The Atlanta Ripper also linked himself to Jack the Ripper on 2 different occasions. While assaulting one of his victims, the Ripper reportedly said, "Jack the Ripper ain't dead yet." The killer also left a number of handwritten letters taped to fireboxes throughout the city. The taunting letters, which said the killer would cut the throats of all Negro women, was signed Jack the Ripper. A girl named Mary Bell Walker, who was killed on May 27, 1911, is believed to be the Atlanta Ripper's first victim. Deaths and murders in the black community were rarely reported in newspapers in the early 1900s. However, Bell Walker's murder drew attention due to her stunning beauty and the sheer brutality of her death. The barbaric killings continued for several weeks, but authorities did not immediately realize they were dealing with a serial killer, and the media did not take enough interest in the killings to feature them on the front page until the body of the 8th victim was found. Sadie Holly, who was killed on July 10, 1911, was the first of the Atlanta Ripper's victims to appear on the front page of the Atlanta Constitution. Like several other victims, Sadie's throat was slashed, and her skull was crushed with a rock. Her body was found dumped in a nearby field. Although her shoes were missing, authorities did not find any evidence that would lead them to her killer. By the time authorities discovered Sadie's body, they were beginning to theorize that the murders were committed by the same person. An article published by the Baltimore Sun said the serial killer appeared to be, quote, experiencing an awful mania of a diseased mind. Although an estimated 20 women were killed by the Atlanta Ripper, 2 women managed to escape. 20-year-old Emma Lou Sharp became concerned when her mother failed to return home from the market when expected. As the Atlanta Ripper targeted women matching her mother's description, Emma Lou feared the worst. In an attempt to find her mother, she followed the path her mother would have taken from the market to their home. Along the way, she met a man who stepped onto the sidewalk and blocked her path. According to Emma Lou, the man said, "I never hurt girls like you." However, he then pulled out a knife and stabbed her in the back. Thankfully, she was not fatally wounded and managed to escape. Her mother, however, was found dead the following day. Emma Lou described her attacker as a tall black man with broad shoulders. She also noted that he was wearing a black hat with a wide brim. Days later, Mary Yadell was walking home from work when she heard someone whistling. Mary became alarmed when the person, who she also described as a tall black man, approached her in a threatening manner. She immediately began screaming for her boss, who rushed to the scene. However, the man who was believed to be the Atlanta Ripper managed to vanish without a trace. Although the Atlanta Ripper killings remain unsolved, authorities arrested multiple people and charged them with the murders. According to newspaper accounts, men named Henry Brown, John Daniel, Todd Henderson, Henry Huff, and Charlie Owens were all arrested and imprisoned for the Atlanta Ripper killings. However, only one of the men was convicted, and his conviction remains a point of heated controversy. John Daniel was released from jail as the killings continued after he was incarcerated. Although it has been suggested that he may have had a partner, there was no conclusive proof linking him to the crimes. Henry Brown, who confessed to the Atlanta Ripper killings, was acquitted when it was revealed that his confession was coerced. It is reported that Brown was beaten by police officers until he confessed to the crimes. Todd Henderson and Henry Huff were both tried for the Atlanta Ripper killings. However, they were both ultimately found not guilty. Charlie Owens was charged in only one of the killings attributed to the Atlanta Ripper. Although he was found guilty, the conviction remains controversial. It was reported that the murders continued for some time after Charlie Owens was incarcerated. Another suspect who was never arrested in the case was a man named Jim Conley. Conley, who fit the description given by witnesses and those who escaped the Atlanta Ripper, was identified as the killer by Detective W.J. Burns. However, nobody ever followed up on the accusations. In March 1912, a grand jury convened and concluded the Atlanta Ripper was a myth. It was reported that the grand jury determined the killings were each committed by a different man and were in no way related. They also determined the women were likely killed in a fit of jealousy after they were found to be engaging in, quote, immoral conduct. Although most of the murders attributed to the Atlanta Ripper were quite similar, critics argued that the region was notorious for violent crime. As none of the murders were solved, it is unknown whether there was one or more Atlanta Rippers, or how many of the killings were committed by a copycat. It's also unclear when the Atlanta Ripper killings began or when they actually stopped. It's widely believed that Mary Bell Walker, who was killed on May 27, 1911, was the Atlanta Ripper's first victim. However, a 1911 article in the Atlanta Constitution suggested the killings actually began in 1909. Although most sources report the Atlanta Ripper stopped killing in 1912, others suggest the Atlanta Ripper was active until 1915. Despite all of this, there can be no doubt that in the first decade and a half of the 20th century, a madman stalked the streets of Atlanta, tracking and killing African American women. Beyond that, the truth of the Atlanta Ripper may never be known.